Today, I will tell you about a tragic event that occurred on the night of February 24, 2019. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, a group of young people was having fun, riding on a boat. It seemed like a typical youthful pastime, but a few minutes later, at 2:20 a.m., the unthinkable happened. The boat at full speed crashed into a bridge. This accident took the life of a young girl and forever changed the destinies of the other participants of that fatal trip. The name of the deceased was Mallory Beach. She was born on April 18, 1999, in the small town of Walterboro, South Carolina, USA. The girl had two older sisters, Morgan and Savannah. 19-year-old Mallory was a graduate of Hampton High School and had just started at the University of South Carolina. Alongside her studies, she worked at a clothing boutique in Beaufort. She had numerous plans for the future, dreaming of becoming an interior designer. Mallory also had a great love for animals. She had her own dogs and even dedicated her free time to volunteering at an animal shelter. She was a sunshine girl, someone you wanted to be friends with and spend time with. According to her family and friends, Mallory was very sociable, kind, and sincere. She was loved by everyone around her. The girl had many friends with whom she enjoyed spending time. At the time of the tragedy, Mallory was dating a guy named Anthony Cook. The couple socialized with 20-year-old Paul Murdaugh, a representative of a very wealthy and influential family in the area. But more on that later. Pay attention to the age of the group. The youngest was only 19 and the oldest was 20. Essentially, they were all still children, despite their legal status as adults. At that age, one seeks new experiences, intense feelings, feeling like the whole world belongs to them. On February 23, 2019, Paul Murdaugh invited friends to a party at his parents' house. Mallory, Anthony, Connor with his girlfriend Mel, and Paul's friend Morgan set off there on a boat owned by the Murdaugh family. It was a 5-meter sea hunting boat, not a cheap toy. On the way, the young people started drinking alcoholic beverages, despite being underage. None of them had the right to buy or consume alcohol, but as I mentioned earlier, at that age, the law often seems distant and unimportant. Well, as the youth sailed to their destination, they had no idea how this party would end. The boat was being steered by intoxicated Paul, while the rest were having a good time, drinking beer and other drinks. It seemed like a great time awaited them ahead. But as they say, man proposes, God disposes. And soon all plans and hopes were dashed by one fatal moment, which I will tell you about right now, but only to those incredible people who will subscribe to this channel, like this video, and leave any comment to ensure that as many people as possible see this material, and I will personally thank you in the comments. When you find out what happened next, your heart will beat like crazy. An interesting detail, they could have reached their destination by car, but for some reason the friends decided to go by boat. Why, you may ask? It's quite simple. Paul and the company wanted to drink on the way and avoid the risk of being stopped by the police. It seems logical, but are such risks justified? The merry group arrived at the Murdaugh residence. There they continued the feast, eating oysters, drinking, having fun. It seemed like a typical youth party, but in my opinion, all the fun went downhill when a group of tipsy individuals decided to sail back. And to make matters worse, Paul was once again steering the boat, barely able to stand at that point. Unfortunately, young people often ignore such things, thinking that nothing will happen to them. Oh, if only they knew how it would end. But let's return to the events of that night. On the way back home, Paul decided to dock at the shore and buy more alcohol. Together with Connor, they went to the store, leaving the rest waiting on the boat. The guys were already quite drunk and continued to drink alcohol, while their friends suffered from fatigue and impatience. Everyone wanted to get home quickly and rest. You know, that's the problem with alcohol, it dulls one's sense of reality. A person stops assessing the situation rationally, ignores the needs and safety of those around them. Perhaps Mallory and the company already felt that something was wrong. But who knew that this alarm would turn into a real horror? Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Paul and Connor finally left the bar. They could barely stand on their feet, but managed to make it back to the boat. Paul once again took the helm, and the group set off towards home. At that point, Murdaugh had lost all sense of reality. He began undressing, leaving himself in just his underwear, claiming he was hot. This despite the freezing weather outside. When a person seriously perceives freezing cold as heat, that's a diagnosis. And how, for heaven's sake, was Paul planning to steer the boat in such a state? He couldn't even control himself, let alone a mode of transportation. And we haven't even reached the most terrifying part yet. What happened next surpassed all my boldest expectations. Mallory and Anthony, observing Paul's erratic behavior, moved to the stern, trying to stay away from trouble. But what happened next shocked them even more. Enraged, Paul unexpectedly struck and pushed his girlfriend, which was the last straw. The boat suddenly gained speed, and the situation began to spiral out of control. This is what alcohol does to people, turns them into aggressive, uncontrollable beings. Paul, who was the life of the party just a few hours ago, now posed a real threat to those around him. And the worst part was that he continued to steer the boat, endangering the lives of everyone on board. At a frantic speed, the boat began to sway from side to side. The friends struggled to stay on their feet, grabbing onto anything they could. Mallory and Anthony clung to each other, hoping that this horror would soon end. But the worst was yet to come. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed and everything around froze. The boat at full speed crashed into the bridge, tossing passengers around like rag dolls. The impact was so strong that Mallory couldn't hold on and was thrown overboard, disappearing into the dark waters of the river. The rest were trapped on the battered boat, stuck between the pilings. I saw photos from the accident scene. It was a horrifying sight. It's hard to imagine anyone surviving such a collision, and as painful as it is to say, Mallory's chances were slim. Being in icy water in February, especially after such an impact, it was practically a death sentence. Meanwhile, the boat began to rapidly sink. Panicked, the friends jumped into the river, trying to save themselves and find Mallory. They called out her name, shone flashlights, but it was all in vain. Darkness and cold thwarted all their efforts. And what about our ill-fated captain? Instead of helping search for Mallory, Paul just lay in the mud under the bridge, not even attempting to get up. The cold and shock had rendered him completely helpless. Fortunately, Connor kept a clear head and called for help. At 2:26 a.m., he dialed 911 and reported the accident. Meanwhile, Anthony continued his desperate search for Mallory, despite his own exhaustion and hypothermia. And Morgan, Paul's friend, lay on the shore with a head injury, bleeding. And all because of what? Because of the irresponsibility and recklessness of one person who decided that revelry was more important than safety. This story is a vivid example of how easily one can ruin not only their own life, but also the lives of those around them. What happened next was so extraordinary that I couldn't believe my ears. While Anthony continued his desperate attempts to find Mallory in the night darkness, Connor and Melly decided to climb up to the bridge for a better view. Unfortunately, even that vantage point didn't help. The river seemed to have swallowed the girl, leaving no trace. Imagine this scene: a foolish night, bone-chilling cold and utter helplessness. You call for help, but all around you is water and darkness. Somewhere in that darkness, your friend fights for every breath, and you can do nothing. It's a real nightmare that, unfortunately, became a reality for Mallory's company. Meanwhile, Paul, who had finally come to his senses, crawled back onto the battered boat. It seemed like the perfect time to repent and put all efforts into rescuing Mallory. But no, our hero decided that his place was next to his injured girlfriend. Strange priorities, wouldn't you say? Minutes after the call, rescuers and police arrived at the scene. They immediately plunged into the icy water, hoping to find Mallory. Meanwhile, medics provided assistance to Morgan, who had suffered a severe blow. It seemed like everyone understood the criticality of the situation. Everyone except Paul. You won't believe it, but this guy continued to sit on the remnants of the boat in just his underwear, kicking his legs and talking on the phone. He didn't even make an effort to help the rescuers, let alone focus on the situation. Paul was in his own world, detached from reality. But what impressed me the most was what happened next. Upon reaching the shore, Paul began to smile and behave as if nothing had happened. No concern, no remorse, no attempt to join the search efforts. He just stood aside while his friends ran around, barely holding back tears and pleading with the river to return Mallory. While passions raged on the shore, rescuers continued to systematically search the river. All available boats and vessels joined the search. People on the boats peered into the water, hoping to spot any trace of the missing girl. But with each passing minute, hope dwindled like the last ray of light in the pitch-black darkness. Rescuers decided to transport Mallory's friends to the hospital. They feared for their health after all. Being in icy water could have serious consequences. Anthony was the last to agree to go. Overwhelmed by despair, exhausted and frozen, he never gave up his attempts to find his beloved. Too much time had passed, the water was too cold. But to stop the search meant to face the worst, so the rescuers continued their work, praying for a miracle. Did a miracle happen? When you find out what happened next, your heart will beat like crazy. Creating such content requires a lot of time, and currently my channel and I are not in the best financial situation. I would be immensely grateful if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation. In return, I will be able to personally respond to you in the comments and mention your noble name in my video. So become sponsors, I will be infinitely grateful to you. While Mallory's friends were recovering in the hospital after the boat tragedy, the police paid them a visit. It seemed like the perfect time for a thorough interrogation to uncover all the circumstances of that fateful night. But it wasn't that simple. The Murdoch family, using their influence, decided to intervene in the process. The Murdoch dynasty is not just wealthy and successful people. They are a whole system that has controlled the legal sphere of the district for decades. Imagine this: since 1920, someone from this family has consistently held the position of chief prosecutor. They had their own law firm, connections in all levels of power. Essentially, the law was just a convenient tool for them to achieve their goals. And when their son Paul found himself at the center of a scandal, the Murdochs decided to use all their arsenal. The boy's father and grandfather personally rushed to the hospital to protect him from the police. They pressured the cops, threatened, and used their status. The main task was to prevent Paul from being taken into custody and charged. Meanwhile, extensive searches for Mallory continued. Divers and even helicopters were involved in the rescue operation. Every inch of the river was combed in hopes of finding the girl alive. But with each passing hour, this hope dwindled, giving way to the bitter realization of reality. Anthony, barely recovered from the hospital, once again plunged into the search. He couldn't come to terms with the thought that he might never see his beloved again. Day after day, the young man tirelessly searched the shores, plunged into the icy water, begged the river to return Mallory. It seemed he was willing to do anything just to find out the truth. Only on March 3, what everyone secretly feared but expected happened. Volunteers searching the river came across the body. It was wedged between logs about 5 miles from the accident site. The current had carried the deceased so far from the scene of the tragedy, as if wanting to forever hide the traces of the crime. The body belonged to Mallory Beach, a beautiful young girl who had her whole life ahead of her. A girl whose only fault was being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. And now she was found cold, motionless, forever frozen in time and space. Mallory was simply a beauty. Long dark hair, radiant eyes, a charming smile. She exuded sincerity and kindness, qualities so rarely encountered in the modern world. And realizing that this girl would never smile again, never hug her loved ones, never fulfill her dreams, it simply breaks the heart. But finding Mallory's body was just the beginning. Now the family had to endure the worst, say goodbye and bury her. All the pain, all the sorrow, all the horror of the situation had to culminate in this tragic finale. And although the official cause of death had not been announced yet, it was evident to everyone. Mallory had become a victim of human irresponsibility and cruelty. A victim of a system that allows the wealthy to evade punishment. A victim of the world's indifference to the lives of ordinary people. Will the Beach family be able to prove Paul's guilt and seek justice? The following events were so tense that I was literally on the edge of my seat. When Mallory's body was retrieved from the water, many still clung to hope that the girl had somehow survived. However, the autopsy results definitively shattered these illusions. The medical examiners determined that the cause of death was drowning and a severe head trauma from being struck by a blunt object. For experienced cops, it's sometimes hard to remain calm when you hear such conclusions. Poor Mallory. She didn't just drown before her death. The girl suffered, felt pain and fear, and all because of someone's senseless prank that turned into a tragedy. The investigation reconstructed the likely chain of events that night. After the boat collided with a bridge support, Mallory struck her head against a hard object, likely the boat's side or a pylon. The powerful impact knocked her unconscious and she fell overboard. In her unconscious state, she sank and drowned. The strong current then carried her body far from the accident site. Around 500 people came to bury Mallory: relatives, friends, acquaintances, just caring individuals. Each brought flowers and tears, each remembered her kindly. On this day, grief united very different people. They stood silently over the casket, unrestrained in their emotions, because everyone understood a great injustice had occurred. When you see such a crowd at the funeral of a young girl, you can't help but wonder what a vibrant and full life she must have lived. How many hearts she touched, how much good she managed to do. And the realization that this life was cut short so early and so tragically becomes chilling. Of course, no one had any doubts about who bore responsibility for Mallory's death. Paul's intoxicated state, his reckless behavior at the helm, everything pointed to this accident being no coincidence. It was a direct consequence of criminal negligence and disregard for safety rules. It would seem the case could be closed and the guilty party put behind bars. But it's not so simple when it comes to the rich and influential. The Murdock family had no intention of giving up their position so easily. They were prepared to do anything to cover for Paul and bury this story. Money and connections often allow people to avoid accountability, especially in small towns like this built on cronyism and a circle of complicity. The Murdocks understood this well, so they immediately set their resources in motion, putting pressure on the police, bribing witnesses, hiring the best lawyers, and the first results of their work didn't take long. The police suddenly started claiming it was unknown who was at the helm during the accident. That witness testimonies were unreliable because everyone was intoxicated, though this is an outright manipulation because Mallory's friends unanimously stated that Paul was driving the boat. Meanwhile, young Murdock himself pretended to have amnesia, claiming he didn't remember how it all went down, that someone else may have been steering the boat, even though the forensics showed his blood alcohol level was 3 times over the limit. In other words, there could be no question of Paul's lucidity or responsibility. There you have it, an example of how the system works when big money gets involved. No matter the evidence against Paul, no matter the testimonies, it's nothing compared to the influence of his family. The police, who should uphold the law, side with the criminal. Witnesses suddenly forget important details, and the deceased is left as just another loud headline in the crime blotter. But does this mean there will be no justice and the guilty will go unpunished? When you see what happens next, you'll be holding your breath in suspense. While the Beach family mourned the loss of Mallory, the investigation continued gathering evidence against Paul Murdock. And it has to be said, there was more than enough of it. Judge for yourselves. In the refrigerator on the boat, they found a veritable arsenal of alcoholic beverages from beer to harder stuff. Interesting, and just who are those intended for? Surely not the underage passengers. Finding alcohol on board is already a violation in itself, especially when one of the underage kids is at the helm, as in our case. It's like handing a loaded gun to a child. You never know how such recklessness will end. But the most glaring evidence of Paul's criminal behavior came from the surveillance camera footage. It clearly shows Murdock nonchalantly strolling into the 24-hour store and buying alcohol. And after successfully purchasing the booze, he almost dances with glee, as if to say, "Look how cleverly I fooled everyone." It gets even more interesting after that. Literally seconds later, Paul is already loading the purchases into the boat's refrigerator, so he consciously brought alcohol on this ill-fated trip. And this while he himself was planning to be at the helm. No doubts, no hesitation, just a pursuit of adrenaline and fun. There you have a portrait of today's golden youth. They don't give a damn about laws, safety, basic human decency. The main thing is to have a wild time and document it all over social media. Consequences? Who cares about those? Daddy's money will smooth over any problems. That's their philosophy of impunity. The GPS navigator data also proved very useful for the investigation. It showed that around 12:30 a.m., as the party was winding down, Paul and his friends stopped at a bar. Surveillance cameras captured him with Connor at the bar counter. The guys were animatedly discussing something while knocking back hard drinks. And this while Paul was driving the boat himself. He must have thought a couple of glasses was no big deal, that he could handle it. Only he overestimated his abilities. Overestimated to the point that it cost a young girl her life. Ultimately, about an hour after visiting the bar, the whole crew gathered back on the boat. The last surveillance camera footage from the dock confirmed this. The friends boarded the boat, Paul started the engine, and they set off into the night darkness, headed straight towards their fatal mistake. Of course, Mallory's relatives had no intention of accepting such a glaring injustice. First, they filed a lawsuit against the store and bar that sold alcohol to the underage Paul, claiming it was their irresponsibility that led to the tragedy. But for some reason, the judge didn't take this argument into account. The suit was dismissed. Once again, the system sided with the powerful elite, so the girl's family decided to come at it from another angle, hold Paul's relatives accountable for allowing him to use someone else's ID to purchase alcohol. And this lawsuit was accepted for consideration. It seems the judge realized the case was gaining notoriety and something had to be done. Because people's patience wears thin when they see the wealthy spitting on the law and common sense. After what happened, I felt like I was transported to another reality. April 18th, 2019 should have been the day Mallory celebrated her 20th birthday. Instead, this date became the day of reckoning for Paul Murdock. The young man was hit with 3 very serious charges: operating a boat under the influence, the unintentional homicide of Mallory Beach, and inflicting severe injuries on 2 other passengers, Connor and Morgan. However, Paul somehow did not consider himself guilty. To all the accusations, he calmly responded, "No, it wasn't me." As if to say, so what if I was a little drunk, it happens. Especially since Daddy had already hired him a whole army of lawyers. So the boy was confident that his dad's golden money would get him off scot-free. You know what bothers me most about these spoiled rich kids? Their unshakable belief in their own untouchability. They genuinely believe you can buy your way out of anything: laws, conscience, human lives. And you know they're kind of right. Because as long as money and connections decide everything in our society, there's no justice to be found. And indeed, the terms under which Paul was released on bail were, to put it mildly, bizarre. The kid posted a measly $50,000 despite his family being able to easily afford much more. And that's it, a bon voyage, you can go on partying. Paul was allowed to freely travel the country, hang out at bars, even operate a boat. Yes, you heard that right, a boat. This after his little joyride had already cost someone their life. While intoxicated, no less. Is that not absurd? Honestly, when I hear stuff like that, my hands just drop. They really had to bend the justice system that far for a potential killer to walk away scot-free. And this while all involved, the police, judges, prosecutors, are supposed to uphold the law, not the interests of the wealthy. Though even the circus with the measly bail amount is just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine Paul's mugshot in the database. Usually these photos are taken at the police station when a suspect is officially arrested. The person wears a prison jumpsuit, hands cuffed. But rules are for mere mortals. For some reason, Paul posed for his criminal portrait in the hallway of his own mansion, looking stylish in a plaid shirt. Not once was he handcuffed, made to wear a prison jumpsuit, or spend a night behind bars. Because why would we want to traumatize the golden child, right? But maybe this tragedy at least served as a wake-up call for Paul. Forced him to come to his senses, reevaluate his behavior. Ultimately, own up to his guilt and face the punishment due like a man, instead of hiding behind the coattails of his influential family. But something tells me that won't happen. The boy is far too accustomed to his untouchable status, and all these court proceedings are just pesky mosquitoes to him. One clap of the hands and poof, problem solved. The events that unfolded next were so shocking that I still cannot come to terms with them. While the public's attention was fixated on the legal wrangling surrounding Paul Murdaugh, something absolutely unexpected occurred. On June 7, 2021, in the midst of the proceedings, Paul and his mother Maggie were found shot dead near the dog kennels on their estate. Yes, you heard that right, shot dead. Remember when I said sometimes fate deals surprises money can't buy? It seems the Murdaugh's time for reckoning had arrived. Someone decided to mete out justice their own way. Or perhaps it was a banal act of revenge, a personal vendetta against the powerful family. The crime scene painted a chilling picture. Paul was shot twice in the chest and head, fired from a non-lethal weapon. The kind that typically doesn't kill but inflicts serious injury. However, at close range to vital organs, such shots can prove fatal. It turns out no amount of money or connections can protect you when someone is truly out for vengeance. And so the question arises, could this murder be linked to the Mallory Beach case? Tied to that question is an intriguing detail. In Paul's pocket, they found his mobile phone positioned quite unusually, as if someone had previously checked its contents, then inconspicuously slipped it back to the owner, as if wanting to hint to investigators, look for answers in the messages. As for Maggie's phone, they initially couldn't find it anywhere. It was only located eventually using the Find My iPhone feature. The mobile was lying somewhere off the estate grounds, and most interesting of all, it had someone else's fingerprints and DNA on it. A slip-up by the killer or a deliberate clue for police? This murder spawned countless questions and conspiracy theories. Why were Paul and his mother specifically targeted? Is it somehow tied to Mallory Beach's death? Or did the Murdaugh clan have other enemies we don't know about? One thing I can say for certain, this story is far from over. The news of Paul and Maggie Murdock's deaths shook the entire city. Hell, the whole state was buzzing like a beehive. After all, it's not every day members of one of the most influential families get gunned down. And the burning question hanging in the air, who did this and why? The police immediately launched an investigation. It was obvious this was a double homicide committed by more than one perpetrator. The weapons testified to that. Paul was shot with a non-lethal gun, Maggie with a rifle. Someone came to the Murdaugh estate with deadly intent to kill more than one person. But what really piqued the investigators' interest was that message with the phones. Why leave Paul's mobile in his pocket but discard Maggie's phone elsewhere? Could it be that someone wanted to show detectives, seek the answer in this woman's messages? Perhaps the key to this bloody saga lies within her? And so as the cops were investigating this murder, an unexpected letter arrived. Its sender was the Beach family. Yes, the relatives of that very Mallory who died on the Murdaugh's boat. And here's what they wrote, I quote, "The Beach family extends its deepest and warmest sympathies to the Murdaugh family during this terrible time. Having experienced the devastation of losing their own daughter, Mallory, the Beach family wishes for the Murdaugh family to find some peace after this tragic loss. The Beach family would like the community to know their thoughts and continued prayers are with the Murdaughs. The Beach family sincerely hopes that someone will come forward and cooperate with law enforcement so that the perpetrator of these senseless crimes can be brought to justice." To me, this letter is an overt hint at a connection between the two tragedies. The Beach family is saying, "We know how the Murdaughs suffered after Mallory's death, so now they've felt that same pain." However, that's just my speculation. Officially, no link between the murder and the boating accident has been established, at least not yet. All participants of that fateful boat trip that claimed Mallory's life provided fingerprints and DNA samples, and none of them matched what was found at the Murdaugh crime scene. So the revenge theory from Beach's relatives or friends seems to have been dismissed. But something in this story clearly doesn't add up. Too many vague details, dark spots, and ominous coincidences, like their housekeeper's death a few years back, or the strange demise of Stephen Smith, a young man linked to the Murdaugh's eldest son, Buster. The case of Paul Murdaugh and his mother is still under investigation. Relatives are filing lawsuit after lawsuit, while someone is trying to uncover the truth about Mallory Beach's death, the girl this all started with. Of course, this story will be discussed in South Carolina for a long time to come. Mallory and the Murdaughs, the boat and estate with its dog kennels, will be mentioned again and again. Some will speak of conspiracy, others of divine retribution. But what do you think? I'm very curious to know. But I want you to remember the main thing. No matter where you are or who you are, you will answer for everything, sooner or later, before God and man. And let Mallory's death serve as a reminder to us all. Be careful who you trust. Don't drink and drive. And never, you hear me, never put your whims above other people's lives. And that's all from me. Thank you for being with me and listening to this difficult story. If it moved you, like and subscribe to our channel. And share your thoughts in the comments. What did you feel as you heard about Mallory Beach? About Paul Murdaugh? About this whole tangled, chilling case? This has been Detective Brooks, and as long as we discuss such things, evil cannot prevail. Take care of yourselves and speak up when you see injustice, for truth is above all else.